Imagine stepping into the resplendent halls of Versailles during the height of its grandeur. The chandeliers shimmer gilded mirrors reflect candlelight from every angle, and the rustle of silk skirts echoes through opulent corridors. Every surface gleams with wealth gold leaf, polished marble, and tapestries that took decades to weave. But amid all this breathtaking luxury, something hits you. Families would share the same tub, one after another, with men entering first and women last. Their gowns were stitched from fine silks, their faces powdered to ghostly perfection, their appearances painstakingly polished. But beneath the fabric, beneath the jewels, the rouge, the fan-fluttering charm was skin untouched by soap for months. They were a study in contradiction, stunning from a distance, but alarmingly unsanitary up close. By the time a royal lady stepped in, the water was tepid, murky, and contaminated by every body that came before hers. Underneath those finely embroidered gowns were tightly laced corsets and many layers of clothing, making perspiration inevitable and inescapable. Their suffering was hidden behind painted faces and elegant postures, their discomfort swallowed in silence. Royal etiquette dictated everything from how to speak, where to stand, to how one should smell. An offensive scent could mean social ruin. So they masked the rot with musk and rosewater, with lavender sachets and herbal satchels hidden beneath gowns. With no daily bathing or fresh undergarments, the result was an environment ripe for skin conditions, infections, and unbearable discomfort. For menstruating women, the conditions were even more dismal. There were no sanitary pads or tampons. Instead, they used rags, which were often reused with minimal washing. These cloths were tucked in place with makeshift belts, and changing them required privasia, rare luxury in a palace where personal space was almost non-existent. If there was any water left at all, Versailles may have been filled with beauty, but it reeked of something far less pleasant. Visitors often wrote with shock about the palace's unforgettable odor, a blend of stale perfume, sweat, mildew, and decay. Even the overpowering cloud of fragrances the court relied on couldn't fully mask the rot beneath. Perfume became less an accessory and more a necessity, an attempt to suffocate the stink of unwashed bodies with expensive oils and floral distillations. Not visually, not emotionally, physically, a stench so powerful it could choke the air right out of your lungs. Welcome to 17th century Versailles, where elegance and rot existed side by side, and where royal women graced with titles and jewels endured some of the most horrifying hygiene conditions imaginable. Bathing, the most basic form of cleanliness, was viewed with deep suspicion. The prevailing science of the day held that water, particularly warm water, opened the pores to disease and death. Doctors warned against soaking in tubs, believing it allowed illness to creep in unseen. The Church, too, condemned frequent bathing as vain, immoral, even sinful. Thus, an entire society turned its back on one of humanity's oldest health rituals. And nowhere was this more evident than in the lives of noble women. Ladies of the court, icons of fashion, femininity, and grace, rarely experienced the cleansing embrace of water. Instead, They relied on damp cloths soaked in vinegar, alcohol, or, astonishingly, even their own saliva to swipe across their faces, hands, and necks. This cleaning was ritual more than remedy, and full-body baths were events so rare they were practically ceremonial. And when those moments did come, they were hardly luxurious. And yet, women were expected to be paragons of beauty. Noble women carried themselves with grace, but grace did not equal comfort. Despite these conditions, court life demanded constant participation. Women were expected to attend endless balls, dinners, and social events, all while maintaining a serene composure. It was an endless, exhausting illusion, an empire of beauty built on a foundation of rot. If bathing or the lack thereof was one aspect of royal hygiene horror, the question of waste was an even more grotesque one. Versailles was a palace fit for emperors, brimming with treasures. Yet it had almost no functioning toilets. For a residence that housed hundreds and welcomed thousands, this was more than an oversight. It was a disaster. Cloth scraps, straw, or even leaves were used in its place. In desperate moments, hands served as last resorts. Washing afterward. Rare, unsurprisingly, parasites and illness spread like wildfire. Special lice scratchers made of silver were fashionable accessories, allowing ladies to relieve themselves discreetly during meals or social events. Their hair, however filthy or infested, was their crown, even if it concealed a living nightmare. With candles flickering everywhere, a gust of wind or a misstep could ignite the towering hairstyles. Women lived with this danger literally hanging over their heads. It wasn't uncommon for wigs to catch fire, leading to burns, accidents, and in some cases, death. Yet, despite the risk, these hairstyles persisted, upheld by the rigid traditions of court fashion. Between dainty bite and graceful conversation, they might pause to gently scratch an itch beneath their towering coiffure. Yet no one dared abandon the wig. Looking unfashionable at court could mean social suicide. So women endured the discomfort, the itching, and the smell because status demanded it. Whether it was enduring the stench of waste-filled corridors or scratching through layers of fat-soaked curls, royal women were caught in a gilded trap. Their lives were a performance where the price of beauty was pain and sometimes parasites. Diarrhea, vomiting, fevers, these weren't isolated events. They were commonplace, woven into the tapestry of court life. Instead of bathrooms, nobles used chamber pots, which they would discreetly place under beds, behind curtains, or in hidden corners. When full, these pots were emptied often by tossing the contents out of windows. If you were unlucky enough to be beneath that window at the wrong time, you might find yourself in a very unpleasant situation. And the horror didn't stop there. Some courtiers, either out of laziness or entitlement, didn't even use chamber pots. Men were known to relieve themselves on balconies or in palace gardens. The result? The corridors of Versailles became impromptu latrines. Royal decrees eventually tried to rein in the filth, mandating weekly cleaning of hallways. Yes, weekly, but by then, the damage was done. Women, with their heavy skirts and elaborate gowns, had to navigate the palace like a battlefield. Carefully lifting fabric, not just to show off fine embroidery, but to avoid stepping in human waste. Toilet paper, of course, didn't exist. And as if that weren't enough, let's talk about the hair. To say wigs were a fashion statement would be an understatement. Royal women wore hairstyles so large, so intricate, they resembled architectural sculptures. Some reached feet above the head and were decorated with pearls, flowers, tiny gardens, and even full model ships. To maintain such an elaborate style, women padded their wigs with wire, cotton, horsehair, and most notoriously, pomade made from beef tallow. This greasy mixture held everything in place, but also invited lice in droves. Lice didn't just appear, they moved in, thrived, multiplied. It was well known that many women carried colonies of the pests in their hair. For poor women, things were simpler. Many shaved their heads to avoid lice altogether. But noble women didn't have that luxury. Wigs were not only nests for lice, they were also flammable. The expectations were inescapable. Appearance dictated power, and power dictated survival. Whether it was enduring the stench of waste-filled corridors or scratching through layers of fat-soaked curls, royal women were caught in a gilded trap. Their lives were a performance where the price of beauty was pain and sometimes parasites. One might imagine that at least food offered some relief from the grim realities of court life. After all, royal banquets were legendary overflowing tables with roasted pheasants, sugared fruits, golden pastries, and wine flowing like water. Rats and insects had free rein, yet the kitchen staff had no choice but to serve whatever they could salvage. The consequences were severe. Royal guests routinely suffered from food poisoning, diarrhea, cramps, vomiting, and parasites were an ongoing threat. Tapeworms were especially common, passed through undercooked meats and filthy hands. Marie Antoinette famously fainted after childbirth due to the heat and crowd in her chamber. These women were already in agony. Instruments weren't cleaned. 1 in 3 children died before age 3. They were the public face of beauty and grace, but their private realities were far more human and far more heartbreaking. And mothers faced terrifying odds, bleeding, infection, fever, all made worse by unclean conditions and societal pressure. Now imagine enduring it in front of dozens of onlookers. Even King Louis XIV wasn't immune. Records suggest he once passed a tapeworm over 6 inches long, a horrifying testament to the palace's health hazards. History remembers the elegance. Few remember the agony. But in these stories, we glimpse the truth beneath the silk and gold, truth far more real, far more haunting, and far more revealing of the cost of royal life. But the truth behind the scenes was far more nauseating. But behind the composed smiles, many were enduring stomach pain, infections, and worse. For noble women, giving birth was not a sacred, private experience. It was a performance. When a queen or high-ranking noblewoman went into labor, her chamber filled not with midwives or loved ones, but with an audience. Courtiers, priests, physicians, and nobles crammed into the room to witness the event. The reason, to ensure the legitimacy of the royal heir. The fear that a stillborn or female child might be swapped for a healthy male led to protocols that robbed women of privacy and dignity. Still, they smiled, sipped, and carried on because that's what court life demanded. The kitchens at Versailles were constantly under siege from the palace's failed plumbing. It wasn't uncommon for raw sewage to back up into food preparation areas. Even Queen Marie Antoinette's private kitchen reportedly suffered such contamination. The result? Food safety was almost non-existent. Without modern refrigeration, meats spoiled quickly. Fruits and vegetables were left out for days. Royal women were expected to dine with grace, to engage in flirtation and social intrigue over meals. And finally, we arrive at the most private, most painful, and arguably the most humiliating aspect of royal womanhood: childbirth. Marie Thérèse, wife of Louis XIV, gave birth in a room so crowded it resembled a public theater. Medical knowledge was limited, and sterilization was unheard of. Doctors often didn't wash their hands. Behind the grandeur of Versailles lay unimaginable suffering. Noble women bore the weight of empire on shoulders that also carried filth, pain, and indignity. From meals tainted with waste to childbirth as spectacle, the lives of royal women were not just gilded, they were burdened.